Okay, I want to clear something up. I want to put something right out on the table and just explain something first before we go any further. I could start off way back at the beginning and tell you about my grandpa and the influence that he had on me during the short period of time that our lives overlapped. About how by the time he was gone, I had already developed a habit of trespassing over miles of farmland and timber to get to farm ponds where I could fish for hours at a time. Or I could jump forward to when I was a young adult and I gave up spending time outside to try and fulfill my creative urges as a DJ in the rave scene during the 90s. Or I could skip past that to my life as a grade school dad, where I spent pretty much all of my free time driving my oldest son around to skate parks and skate competitions, where my job was to shoot and edit the videos. I could even jump forward from that all the way to my life as a responsible adult. When I finally got a career job in IT and a mortgage and a never-ending to-do list that turned me into a proper, soulless zombie. That stuff's all just backstory. The real story, the story that I'm here to tell you today, starts with a lump. A very small lump that I found on my neck shaving one day that I didn't really do anything about for a while. Eventually that lump turned into a doctor appointment. That appointment turned into a referral. The referral turned into a biopsy that made the lump very angry. And the biopsy turned into a phone call. Hello, Mr. Ransom? We'd like to bump up your scheduled follow-up appointment. Could you come in first thing tomorrow morning and could you bring your wife with you, please? That's not the kind of phone call you want to get. The immediate diagnosis was in a family of oropharyngeal cancers, which basically means cancer somewhere in the oral cavity. Mine was a tumor in the very base of my tongue, and I was stage 4. That was not a good day. A cancer diagnosis is kind of like a tornado that just shows up in the middle of the day. You had your own agenda and things you wanted to get done, and suddenly all of those things get cast aside, and you have one simple objective. My oncologist sat me down and told me this diagnosis was sort of a good news, bad news diagnosis. The good news was that this type of cancer often responded pretty well to aggressive treatment. If I could make it to 2 years, the survival rate shot up to over 75%. If I could make it to 5 years, he told me to throw a party because they don't even call it remission at 5 years, they call it cured. The bad news was that the treatment for this cancer was particularly unpleasant. And because my case was so advanced, I was going to be looking at the particularly unpleasant side of the particularly unpleasant spectrum. 11 blasts of radiation, 5 days a week for 6 weeks, with 3 high-octane doses of chemotherapy along the way. So it was time to buckle up and get ready for a ride. The first thing they did was took me down and molded a mask to my face. This mask was used to bolt my head to the table for the radiation blasts so that I couldn't move. Once they were finished with that, the next thing they did was send me in and punch a hole in my stomach and put in a feeding tube. My oncologist explained to me that this treatment would not only take away my ability to taste anything or to generate my own saliva, but that I would lose the ability to eat for myself and eventually probably to even swallow at all. In the interest of trying to keep a positive attitude about the whole thing, I decided I would create a video diary to document the whole process. And that all went just fine until somewhere between maybe a third and halfway through the treatment, at which point things started to get very, very real. One evening I got to thinking about my grandpa. My grandpa died when I was in the 6th grade, but not before going through a prolonged period of cancer treatments and hospitals, and my best memories of him are of him fishing and working at his workbench in his basement at my grandparents' house. Unfortunately, a lot of my standout memories are of him being sick. My youngest son was the same age then as I was when my grandpa died, and it occurred to me that if I didn't survive this, all he'd have to look back on would be his childhood memories, like I had, and this video that I was making where he could go back and watch his dad get sick and die. I stopped video recording right then, and I deleted all of the recordings that I'd made so far. I made a promise to myself that if I survived this, I was going to leave a much better legacy than that. Eventually, I got through the treatment, and then I had a long, long road to recovery from the treatment itself. In all, it was 6 months before I was cleared to finally go back to work. And even when I did get to go back to work, food still tasted like cardboard. It hurt to eat. I didn't have any of my own spit. I carried a water bottle with me like 24 hours a day for months. And there was so much damage that they couldn't get good, clean scans to tell me if the treatment had really been successful or not. So it was mostly just a lot of going back to the doctor very frequently and getting small doses of cautious optimism. Eventually, the cautious optimism started to turn into real optimism, and I got to stop focusing on just surviving, and I started to let myself look at the future again. And I had a lot of questions. How had I gotten so wrapped up in chasing after a dream that wasn't really mine? Why did it take almost dying to realize that I was barely even living? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it now? After months of being stuck inside, where my only vacations were trips to doctor's offices and hospitals where I'd get poked and prodded and tested, I was really, really hungry to get outside and just be outdoors. I took my youngest son fishing a lot. It turned out that he liked to fish just as much as I did when I was a kid, so we loaded up our gear and we hit it hard. He was my main fishing partner. In fact, it was his idea to get the kayaks. He worked me over for an entire summer before I finally broke down and bought a pair. Once I got out in the kayak a few times, it became pretty clear that I'd found something that had really genuinely sparked a passion inside me. I remembered that promise that I'd made to myself, and suddenly it was all so clear. I was going to take all those different skills and talents and desires, and I was going to point them all in the same direction, and I was going to make something positive. I was going to create something that I could be proud of, that my family could look back on someday. That's what the videos all started out as, and at their heart, that's what they'll always be. They're meant to serve as a kind of legacy for my family, for my kids, for their kids, and hopefully someday for their kids. One day they're going to get a track back through some old videos and watch Grandpa when he was out tearing it up, and that's the goal. My reason for sharing these videos is simply to try and make some small contribution. My goal is to always post up something that's a little bit entertaining, a little bit helpful, and a little bit inspiring, and ideally a little bit of all three. My hope is that they inspire you to get out and have some adventure in your life. Find something that feeds your soul and get out and do it. I hit the 5-year mark and got the official all clear back in 2016, but the truth is I sort of stopped worrying about the cancer a while before that. It turns out that the thing to fear isn't death, it's not living. I didn't know if I would make it 5 years. I didn't know if I would make it 2 years. The truth is that cancer or not, I didn't know if I was going to make it to the next day. None of us do, ever. Each day, you wake up with at least one more opportunity to get out and do something that makes you feel alive.